Parliament. But also at the end, when we do a Q&A, if anyone wants to ask me local questions about local councillors or policies, which we are unveiling in the next week, please feel free to ask as well. So we start with Patrick.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for Chris for inviting us here tonight and being a dynamic chairman of the Barnet branch, and to Andrew Reid for hosting it at his great facility here, great community facility in Barnet. Now, I'm Communications Director for UKIP. Before that, I was Chief Political Commentator on the Daily Express, and my colleague Tim is the Head of Policy for UKIP. And I think it's fair to say both of us are what the former UKIP MEP Godfrey Bloom would term, with some sense of derision, new UKIP, which was something he complained about after stepping out of line once too often and portraying the sort of image of our party that he was obviously very comfortable with. I don't know about Tim, he'll tell you later, but I'm very comfortable with the image new UKIP. It's not like New Labour because we didn't make it up, Godfrey did, but if that's what he wants to call us, then that's what we're happy to be called. Because for many years, UKIP suffered from an image that our opponents tried to portray us. In the words of Michael Howard, it was cranks and gadflies when UKIP first started having success. And then David Cameron, a sort of nastier attack on us. He called us fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists, because he wanted to send out the message to Conservative voters who found parts of the UKIP message attractive that we were not a respectable party to vote for. I don't think he believed that. I think it was a cynical PR man's sort of ploy to try and keep us down, keep us in our box. Well, we're not in our box anymore. I remember when UKIP membership in Christmas 2012, about 15 months ago, went through the 20,000 mark, which for a smaller party was a massive landmark. In those 15 months since, we put on an average of 1,000 members every month, to the point where tomorrow night, when Nigel Farage goes toe-to-toe with Nick Clegg in the first of the live Europe debates, we are very hopeful of going through the 35,000 members mark. We are the fastest growing political movement in this country. Some would say the only growing political movement in this country. And I think we can lie to the idea that people aren't interested in joining political parties anymore. That's a nice comforting notion for the old parties who've stopped connecting with the public and with voters and want to excuse their plunging line on the graph. At the current rate, we'll have more members than Liberal Democrats for the next general election, and when that graph crosses, I'm predicting the lines will never cross back again, because we believe we are now really connecting with the British public, and the reason we're doing so is quite simply that we are putting new choices on the ballot paper for the British people, choices that if they've ever been there, haven't been there for very many years, because often in this country, before UKIP's rise, there weren't three political parties really. There was only one entity, which many of us in UKIP refer to as the Lib Lab Con. So I want to talk to you tonight about those new choices we're putting on the ballot paper and to see if you agree with them, if you like the sound of them, and if you do and you think they're important for Britain, I'm going to urge you to back us, to come and help us, because everyone in this party is doing their contribution, giving their full contribution to what we believe are great patriotic causes. And it's not jingoistic, it's about Britain believing in itself again and Britain taking back democratic control of its decisions. So the first new choice we're putting on the ballot paper as a mainstream party that hasn't been there for a very long time won't surprise you. It's to get out of the European Union, saving Britain £55 million every single day. And that, I'm sure, has overwhelming support from the British public, 2-1 in favour if there was a referendum tomorrow of getting out. But that's probably the policy we're best known for, and some people say, when they stop talking about cranks and gadflies and all the rest of it, that we're a one-trick pony. But we so aren't a one-trick pony. For a start, something flows from that decision to get out of the European Union, and that is that this country can take back control of its borders and its immigration system, and that is very important. But I think that parties, as well as deriding their opponents, must also put their hands up if they've got the tone a bit wrong themselves. And I want to talk to you tonight quite a bit about immigration, because UKIP for many years was the one party trying to raise the downsides of uncontrolled mass immigration. You know, it made no sense in a congested country like Britain to be importing people for welfare tourism, to be importing people to go on to benefits or to earn the minimum wage and probably claim more in work benefits than they were paying tax into the system. But because immigration wasn't really allowed to be debated and none of the other parties addressed these issues at all, I think we found ourselves at times exclusively talking about the downsides of immigration. And that was a valid role because no one else was entering the debate like that. But perhaps at times we also forgot about the upsides of immigration, that there are many people, many very talented people from all over the world who've come to this country, and in particular to this city, and have put more into the pot than they've taken out, have brought investment, have created jobs, and probably most importantly of all, have subscribed to the basic norms of British society and British cultural values, created employment, really added to the vibrancy of our country. And I think as UKIP, my ambitions for UKIP is that UKIP will be the party that gives immigration a good name again, right? And we say, I hope that all UKIP people will remember to say thank you to the immigrants who've come in, created wealth, employment, opportunities, subscribed to our cultural values, put more in the pot than they've taken out. And they undoubtedly hundreds of thousands of such people, and we need to honour them and say thank you and make clear we're a party that welcomes people like that. Right. So UKIP is not an anti-immigration party, but it's an anti-mass, uncontrolled immigration party, right? And that is a crucial distinction, which our opponents don't like to acknowledge, but we must make it. We must make them acknowledge it, because I'm sure that's where the vast majority of British people are. So why we connect that to the European Union is, with the European Union membership comes this rule about complete freedom of movement, and since enlargement that means freedom of movement for people from economies which pay wages a small fraction of the wages, even the minimum wage that's available in this country. And that really is unsustainable. So we've seen since 2004 the greatest migratory wave this country has ever seen, and Labour didn't even take advantage of the transitional immigration controls that were available. They just sort of allowed complete freedom of movement for all those new countries, some of them quite large countries, from day one. And I think that has put our public services, our social housing under massive pressure, our schools and hospitals too. And often, many of the people who come in have tried to work, got employment, indeed have worked, but we offer in this country a fairly advanced welfare state that most of us are proud of. So, for instance, if someone comes in just with 2 school-aged children, that's £5,000 a year just for a school place, another £1,700 a year on child benefit. If they're in low-paid work, it's another £500 each per pupil because of the pupil premium, and that's before you start talking about the NHS costs, the cost of the transport system, and all the rest of it. So what we're getting here is large multinational employers, many of whom don't pay in much corporation tax themselves, having a source of really cheap labour, and the employment not generating very much at all for the public purse, and it's ordinary taxpayers who are being fleeced through this. And I don't blame people coming and wanting to improve their lives, but if it's a situation that's actually making the public finances, which let's face it are shot to pieces anyway, even worse and even more parlous, then that is a terrible situation. And that's before we go on to the effect on our own youth unemployment, which has been rising, oddly enough, since 2004 as well, and indeed on wage compression, particularly in working class occupations where wages have been falling behind the cost of living for 6 or 7 years in a row now. So that immigration system is bust, and the more the European Union expands and enlarges, the more unsustainable it becomes. And only by leaving the European Union can we get what Britain really needs that would give immigration a good name again, and that's a points-based system like they have in Australia, based on work permits, where people come in to fill the skill shortages that there are. They come in to do jobs which earn high wages, which there are skill shortages for, skilled occupations, paying in more tax than they take out, and we need to make sure they subscribe to basic British values like freedom of expression and gender equality too. And I think if we communicate that immigration policy in that spirit, that we can really connect with London as well. Because let's face it, London is a very optimistic, dynamic, go-ahead city. And much of that dynamism has come from immigrants who have contributed, who have brought new ideas. And I don't think London as a whole will ever vote for a kind of policy offer on immigration that just says, put up the shutters, we don't want any of them, that kind of mean-spirited negative effect. So the motto from me is, let's be the party that gives immigration a good name again by controlling it, by having volume control and quality control as well. Now, I read a statistic the other day, I think it was 28% of all the vagrants in central London, and I have to say vagrancy and begging I think is massively on the rise in the last 2 or 3 years in central London, and that appalls me, but 28% of them are from Eastern Europe. Now, I don't think London ever had a skills shortage on vagrancy. I don't think there was a gap to be filled, the benefit to this country. Of course there wasn't. And yet we find ourselves turning away highly skilled people. Surgeons from India or New Zealand aren't able to come here because the government's got itself into a situation where there's a net immigration target, and it can only influence immigration from a certain group of countries, the non-EU countries, and it has to accept everyone from the EU. So we have a very skewed immigration system because of that.
That is absolutely right, because there is Australian, there's New Zealand people that speak our language, that can come there, they're fully qualified, need a visa or anything like that. But then get EU people coming in there, I've got qualification, can't even speak English.
Right,
You
so
know,
that's what I'm
what's
saying.
going
We
on?
need a comprehensive point system that doesn't discriminate against any country in the world, judges people on their merits and what they can offer. And that's a new choice that UKIP is putting on the ballot paper, that the Lib Lab Con is unable and unwilling to match. And I think that's key. I think once London hears that, London will respond to UKIP in massive numbers as well. But it doesn't end there, because we offer lots more choices. That UKIP has one policy, and the other 3, so I'm going to call it again the Lib Lab Con, they offer the same policy, the same different policy. I'm allowed to say that sounds Irish because I'm called Patrick O'Flynn. I'll start with, we believe in bringing back the option of academic selection in state education, so that bright kids from non-privileged backgrounds, once again, can give all those old Etonians a run for their money. Right? None of the others do. They won't do it. I don't know why. I'm often likened the difficulty of stretching high ability people without concentrating and challenging them against each other. It seems to me some of the football teams around here, Arsenal and Spurs, with their esteemed youth football projects, what they don't do is have their elite young players at 13 and 14 and say, I'll tell you what we're going to do from now on, we're going to put you in mixed ability football with kids who have no aptitude, and it's your job to raise up the standards of all the kids with no talent. That's what we're telling our talented kids without privilege and money behind them in the state sector at the moment. And I went to a comprehensive school, and I was fortunate enough, it was a pretty good one, and I got to a very good university, but I saw children at that school who didn't have the same parental support and backing and ambition that I had instilled in me. Talented children falling by the wayside, and there are many good comprehensive schools in Britain, and the ones that are good will attract support and intake. And I don't want to say from top down we abolish comprehensive schools. I'm just talking about new choices, because we live in the era of choice, you know, and we need public services to catch up on some of those choices so people can really feel that the state is working for them and their taxation is creating facilities and services that offer them what they want. So choice in education we are offering. We're also the one party that says we should scrap the £18 billion a year Climate Change Act brought in by Miliband, cheered on by both Nick Clegg and David Cameron, that puts up your domestic energy bills by hundreds of pounds a year, and possibly just as importantly means that our industrial, our heavy industry and the skilled industrial jobs this country so needs in manufacturing, energy intensive industries, they can't compete in Britain anymore, so they're going overseas to places with less onerous environmental regulations. So you're often getting an export of heavy industry, skilled manufacturing jobs to places like India and China, which have much lower environmental standards and burn coal-fired, creating new coal-fired power stations all the time. So ironically, not only does Britain lose the jobs, but there's an actual net increase in global emissions because the environmental standards are that much lower. And it's done, it seems to me, just so Cameron, Clegg and Miliband can get slapped on the back about how well Britain is outstripping everyone else meeting these environmental carbon reduction standards. Now that strikes me as a vanity project. So UKIP would scrap the Climate Change Act. We believe in Britain doing its best and its fair share as part of a global deal to cut pollution in general. And we're not a party that all believes climate change isn't happening at all, or there's nothing in the sort of theory about carbon emissions. We just don't see the point of Britain, which contributes now, I think it's 1.6% of global emissions and falling fast. We don't see the point of putting our gas and electricity bills, making them totally unaffordable with all the surcharges for wind farms, when we add such a little amount. And let us not forget as well that in Britain, the real climate killer is the cold, not the heat. We have something called excess winter deaths, or excess mortality, which in a bad year, 20,000 mainly frail elderly people die through the cold, often because they can't afford to heat their homes. And again, that's on the back of this vanity project, which often is sending huge subsidies to landowners who are very wealthy individuals, and they expect to be frauded for that vanity project. So we're offering a new choice there. We're also offering a new choice in the field of foreign aid, where they've all signed up to this arbitrary target of 0.7% of GDP, of our entire GDP has to go on foreign aid. We say that's ridiculous, and that when times are tough, charity must begin at home. Now, we don't say we should scrap. We don't say we should scrap foreign aid. There are bits of foreign aid which are really efficient. The inoculations are really efficient. The disaster emergency famine relief, that's really important. But we only spend a couple of billion out of the 12 billion on those sort of things, the foreign aid that we support. A lot of it is this bilateral, long-term money going from British taxpayers to some very dodgy, corrupt regimes. And a lot of that gets filtered off, and I don't know about you, but I am...
Don't forget my President Zulu's palace.
Well, indeed, I'm going to talk about something like that. I'm saying, I don't know about you, but I am sick of the idea of our foreign aid going to finance fancy apartments on the Champs-Élysées for their cousins and nieces and nephews of African descent. And again, it's a vanity project. Cameron, Clegg, Miliband, they all like going to the global summits and getting patted on the back for meeting the UN's targets and how great they are, how generous they are with other people's money. There's more, of course. Law and order. This used to be a country where the political parties competed to be known as the party of law and order. But now they all believe in something, alternatives to prison, or what they more usually term community punishments, I think they're called that because it's the community that normally gets punished. When people who victimise law-abiding citizens time and time again don't get put away, then they're free to carry on victimising, and law-abiding people don't go out at night. You know, they have a perception of the risk of crime on the streets, nothing's done about it. There's not only are the people not punished or contained, there's no deterrent signal that goes out for those associates of the criminals who could fall into criminal ways. If they see a term imprisonment for their mate, they're less likely to do it themselves. So UKIP would get back to old-fashioned law and order.
Yeah.
Stations are all closed down.
Right.
Can we bring back police station to North Finchley, Hampstead, so they're all closed down?
Well, we would certainly cut bureaucracy and get more money on the front line. I'm not an expert in London police stations, so I won't make a policy pledge, which there could be all sorts of detail. But in general, we're on your side about public services, particularly police and law and order, being visible and accessible, and that's really important. So I can tell you that basically I agree with you on that. Now, a related issue, of course, is the European Court of Human Rights, which is technically different from the EU, but the EU is in the process of corporately joining that, which means that anyone who's a member of the EU has to belong to the European Court of Human Rights as well. And that means that we have in this country something called a Supreme Court, which has never lived up to its name, because the Supreme Court is this sort of bunch of not very well qualified judges, most of them not British, that sits in Strasbourg, some of whom come from countries with much more dodgy human rights records than Britain, telling Britain what to do, telling us that we shouldn't have indefinite periods of imprisonment for our worst killers, telling us that prisoners should have the right to vote, telling us that we cannot deport preachers of hate who have victimised the British people, who have really not lived up to what they should do when hospitality has been shown to them, have not subscribed to our values. Well, UKIP would get us out of the jurisdiction of that court, and it would enable proper justice to take the place. And none of the others would do that. None of the others would do that either. Now, tomorrow, Nigel Farage gets to go toe-to-toe with Nick Clegg for the first of two live debates. Tomorrow's one is on Sky and LBC. We're all very excited about that. UKIP is at a point now where we think we're connecting with so many more people. We think we've punched through the lies and the smears. And people understand why some of the newspapers that are attached to some of the old parties are coming at us so hard, because they know we're connecting. We won't be deterred. We're going to stay positive. Our membership keeps rising. Our vote share keeps rising. Our by-election results keep getting better. And all those other parties, the opposite is true. So we know we have a message which ordinary people, hard-working people, are receptive to in this country, and that we're onto something. We will do our work. We will work as hard as we can. We want everybody who believes in at least some of what I've been talking about tonight. We'd love you to make a contribution. If you're not a member of UKIP, why not join? Every one of you counts. I think we're 296 members short of that 35,000 mark. We're going to get there within a couple of weeks anyway, but whoever joins tonight, you might turn out to be the 35,000th member, because all around the country we're having these public meetings and converting people, and the membership is rising by 1,000 every single month. So come and join the successful movement. If you don't want to join, but you can give us a donation, however small, that would be great as well. Or just go and vote for us on May the 22nd in the local elections. We think we're going to have our best ever results in London and elsewhere. We're going to recruit an army of councillors that can then take us to the next stage in the general election next year as well. We're on the move. We think we've got a great message for London. We accept we made mistakes in the past. We have allowed some of our opponents to portray us as negative people who want to live in the past. That's not true at all. We don't think there's anything modern about the European Union. It's a globalised world now. We need to get out there and trade with it. If you like what you've heard, then I ask you, join, help, do what you can for us, because we think we've got a great patriotic cause and we're on to a winner. Thank you.